The Montana sun beat down mercilessly on the parched landscape, casting long shadows across the weathered fence posts of the Clearwater Ranch. Thomas Blackwood wiped the sweat from his brow with a handkerchief that had long since faded from red to a dusty pink. At 67, his face was etched with deep lines, each one a testament to decades spent working this unforgiving land. "Damn heat," he muttered to no one in particular. His border collie, Scout, lifted her head from where she rested in the scant shade of the porch, her intelligent eyes tracking his movements. 20 years of solitude had taught Thomas to appreciate these silent conversations. The ranch house stood alone on a gentle rise, overlooking acres of grassland that stretched toward the distant mountains. Once, it had been a bustling family operation. Now, Thomas maintained just enough cattle to keep himself occupied and the bills paid. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles down the road, which suited him fine. After Sarah's passing 18 years ago, he'd found comfort in the silence. Thomas reached for the canteen hanging from his belt and took a conservative sip. Water was precious out here, especially during this record-breaking drought. 3 months without significant rainfall had everyone in Clearwater County on edge. He gazed toward the horizon, where heat waves distorted the view of the county road. Something caught his eye, a small figure moving slowly along the fence line. Squinting, he made out what appeared to be a child, wobbling more than walking. "What the hell?" Thomas muttered, immediately heading toward the gate. Scout followed, suddenly alert. As he drew closer, he saw it was a boy, no more than 10 years old, his face flushed an alarming shade of red. The child's clothes were damp with sweat, his breathing labored. "Hey there, son," Thomas called, quickening his pace. "You all right?" The boy looked up, his eyes unfocused. "My bike broke," he managed before his knees buckled. Thomas caught him before he hit the ground. Heat exhaustion, possibly heading toward heat stroke. Without hesitation, he lifted the boy and carried him to the shade of a large cottonwood tree. "Scout, stay," he commanded, then hurried to retrieve his canteen. "Small sips," Thomas instructed, holding the water to the boy's cracked lips. "Not too fast now." The boy drank gratefully, color slowly returning to his face. "Thank you, mister." "What's your name, son?" "Miguel Ramirez." "What are you doing out here alone, Miguel?" The boy explained that he'd been riding to his grandmother's house on the other side of the valley when his bike chain broke. He tried to walk the rest of the way, but had underestimated the distance and the heat. Thomas nodded, understanding the foolishness of youth. "Let's get you cooled down. Then I'll drive you to your grandma's." In the ranch house kitchen, Thomas handed Miguel a glass of cold water with a slice of lemon and a pinch of salt, an old rancher's remedy for the heat. The boy's eyes wandered around the space, taking in the worn furniture and the photographs on the wall. "Is that your family?" Miguel asked, pointing to a faded picture of a younger Thomas with a woman and a teenage boy. Thomas felt the familiar tightness in his chest. "Yes. My wife, Sarah, and our son, James." "Where are they now?" The directness of children, both refreshing and painful. "They're gone. Sarah passed from cancer, and James, he moved to Chicago. We don't talk much." Miguel nodded with a solemnity beyond his years. "My dad left when I was 5. Mom says sometimes people don't know how to stay." Thomas was struck by the wisdom in those words. "Your mom sounds smart." After ensuring Miguel was sufficiently recovered, Thomas loaded the boy's broken bicycle into his old pickup truck and drove him to his grandmother's house, a modest home at the edge of town where Maria Ramirez tended a vibrant garden despite the drought. The elderly woman rushed out when they arrived, relief washing over her face. After the explanations and profuse thanks, Thomas awkwardly accepted an impromptu invitation to stay for dinner. It had been years since he'd eaten at someone else's table. As he drove home under a sky turning purple with dusk, Thomas couldn't explain the strange lightness he felt. Just a small act of kindness, water for a thirsty child. Nothing any decent person wouldn't have done. He didn't realize that in a town starved for good news, word of his deed would spread like wildfire through Clearwater County, reaching ears he never expected to hear it. 15 years passed, each season blending into the next for Thomas Blackwood. The drought of that summer became a distant memory, replaced by new worries and small daily victories. His herd dwindled further as arthritis made ranching increasingly difficult, but he stubbornly refused to sell the Clearwater property despite generous offers from developers eyeing the land. On a crisp October morning, Thomas sat at his kitchen table reviewing his meager finances when Scout's urgent barking drew his attention. Through the window, he spotted a sleek black SUV approaching on his long driveway, a rarity that immediately put him on guard. Government types, probably, or maybe real estate vultures. Grabbing his hat and his walking stick, more necessity than accessory these days, he stepped onto the porch. Scout positioned herself protectively at his side, her muzzle now gray, but her eyes still sharp. The SUV stopped, and a tall man in an expensive suit emerged. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar to Thomas, though he couldn't place it. "Mr. Blackwood?" The man's voice carried across the yard with a confidence that spoke of city living and board rooms. "Depends who's asking," Thomas replied, reflexively gruff. The stranger smiled, approaching with an extended hand. "Miguel Ramirez, sir. Though I don't expect you to remember me." Thomas froze, memories flooding back, a heat-stricken boy, a broken bicycle, a grandmother's garden. Miguel? Little Miguel from the heat wave. The man's smile widened. Not so little anymore. Indeed, the boy had grown into a broad-shouldered man of 25, with intelligent eyes and a firm handshake. Thomas invited him inside, curiosity overcoming his usual reticence with visitors. Over coffee that Thomas brewed too strong out of nervousness, Miguel explained that he had founded a successful tech company in San Francisco that specialized in water conservation systems for agriculture. Inspired, he said, by growing up during droughts in ranching country. "We just closed a major funding round," Miguel explained. "I wanted to come back here personally, to where it all started for me." Thomas furrowed his brow. "What do you mean, where it started?" Miguel leaned forward. "That day you found me, gave me water, and drove me my grandmother's, it changed everything. I was just a kid, but I never forgot what you said when I asked why you helped me." Thomas shook his head, bemused. "I don't recall saying anything profound." "You said, 'Out here, we don't let people go thirsty, no matter who they are.'" Simple words, but they stuck with me through some tough times. Thomas remembered the conversation now, a throwaway comment he'd made while driving the boy home. Miguel continued, "My company's first project was developing affordable water filtration systems for rural communities. We've expanded since then, but that remains our core mission, and it all traces back to that day." Thomas shifted uncomfortably under the weight of undeserved credit. "You'd have done fine without running into a grumpy old rancher." "Maybe," Miguel conceded, "but life hinges on these small moments, doesn't it? Anyway, I've come with a proposition." Thomas tensed, expecting an offer to buy his land. "I'd like to install our newest irrigation system on your ranch, free of charge. It would reduce your water usage by 60% while improving your pasture quality. A test case, if you will, and a thank you." Relief mixed with suspicion in Thomas's mind. "That's mighty generous, but I run just 40 head of cattle these days. Hardly worth your fancy technology." Miguel smiled. "It's not about the return on investment, Mr. Blackwood. Sometimes it's about honoring the past." After further discussion and Miguel's patient answers to his skeptical questions, Thomas reluctantly agreed. What did he have to lose? Over the next month, Miguel's team transformed sections of the Clearwater Ranch with minimally invasive equipment that Thomas barely understood, but whose results he couldn't deny. The installed system captured morning dew, recycled water, and delivered precise amounts to each section of pasture. By Thanksgiving, Thomas's remaining cattle grazed on grass more lush than he'd seen in decades, despite using a fraction of the water. When the first snow fell, Miguel visited again, this time bringing his mother, now a respected physician in Denver, who remembered Thomas with tearful gratitude. As they shared a meal in his newly renovated kitchen, another test project Miguel had insisted on, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in years: connection. The house that had held only silence and memories now echoed with conversation and laughter. He couldn't know that Miguel's visit was merely the beginning, that the ripples from that long-ago act of kindness were about to become a wave. Spring arrived early the following year, bringing with it a peculiar energy to Clearwater County. Thomas noticed it first in town, during his monthly supply run at Peterson's General Store. People looked at him differently, with a kind of deference he found unsettling. "Heard Miguel Ramirez fixed up your place," said Bill Peterson, bagging Thomas's groceries with unusual care. "That boy's doing remarkable things. His water systems saved the Henderson farm last summer." Thomas grunted noncommittally. "Just testing his equipment on my place. Nothing special." Bill's wife, Eleanor, emerged from the back room. "Nothing special? Thomas Blackwood, that boy is practically a celebrity now. Did you know he mentioned you in that big magazine article? Called you his inspiration." Thomas hadn't known, and found the information deeply uncomfortable. "Man does one decent thing 15 years ago and never hears the end of it," he muttered, collecting his bags. "One decent thing can be enough," Eleanor called after him as he headed for the door, "especially when it's the right thing at the right time." Driving home, Thomas caught sight of unusual activity at the old fairgrounds outside town, trucks and equipment being unloaded, tents being erected. Must be preparing early for the county fair, he thought, though it was only April. The next morning, Thomas awoke to Scout's insistent barking. Looking out his bedroom window, he saw what appeared to be a rider on horseback at his gate, nearly a mile down his long driveway. Curious, he dressed quickly and grabbed his binoculars from the closet. Through the lenses, he could make out a woman on a palomino, simply sitting there. Not approaching, not calling out, just waiting. What in God's name? Thomas muttered. He made coffee, expecting the rider to leave. When she remained there an hour later, Thomas's curiosity got the better of him. He climbed into his truck and drove down to the gate. The rider was Andrea Laughlin, who ran the equestrian center on the other side of the county. Thomas knew her only by reputation. "Morning," he said cautiously. "Something I can help you with?" Andrea smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood. No, I'm just waiting." "Waiting for what, exactly?" "For the others. I'm just the first." Thomas frowned. "I don't follow." Andrea seemed surprised. "You don't know about the ride?" Before Thomas could respond, the sound of approaching hooves drew their attention. Coming up the county road were 3 more riders, 2 men and a woman, all on horseback, moving at a leisurely pace. "Here comes some now," Andrea said, as if this explained everything. "What is this?" Thomas demanded, alarm rising. "Some kind of protest." Andrea's expression softened. "No, Mr. Blackwood. It's a tribute. Miguel Ramirez organized it. Didn't he tell you?" Thomas shook his head, bewildered. "It's called the Kindness Ride," she explained. 400 riders from across the state, gathering to honor what you did for Miguel and what he's done for the community since. We're coming one by one, each representing a family helped by his water systems." Thomas stood speechless as the 3 riders approached and stopped, nodding respectfully to him, but saying nothing. They took positions beside Andrea, forming a line at his gate. "But I don't understand," Thomas finally managed. "Why just sit there? Why not come in?" "That's not how it works," Andrea explained. "We wait until all 400 arrive. It'll take 3 days. Then Miguel will come, and he'll explain the rest." Thomas drove back to his house in a daze. By noon, there were 12 riders at his gate, sitting silently on their horses. By sunset, the number had grown to 37. Thomas watched through his binoculars as they set up a small camp just off his property, taking turns so that at least 10 riders remained at the gate at all times. That night, he barely slept. His phone rang just after dawn, a rare occurrence in itself. "Thomas, it's Sheriff Patterson. Don't mean to alarm you, but there's quite a situation developing at your place." "The riders," Thomas said. "I know. Well, they've got permits, but the county road's getting crowded. News van showed up about an hour ago. Thought you should know." Thomas thanked him and hung up, then stepped onto his porch. In the distance, he could now count nearly 50 riders at his gate. Beyond them, vehicles lined the county road, and he could make out the distinctive shapes of television news vans. Scout pressed against his leg, sensing his unease. "What have you gotten us into, old girl?" he murmured. As if in answer, his phone pinged with a text message, a modern convenience Miguel had insisted on setting up for him. It was from Miguel himself. "I'm sorry for the surprise. They wanted to thank you their own way. I'll be there on the third day to explain everything. Until then, just know this is all because one act of kindness can change more lives than you ever imagined." Thomas sank into his porch chair, overwhelmed. The distant line of silent riders blurred as unexpected tears filled his eyes. All this for a canteen of water offered to a thirsty child on a hot summer day. By the second day, Thomas Blackwood's isolation had been thoroughly shattered. The line of riders at his gate had grown to over 200, their silent presence creating a spectacle that drew onlookers from across 3 counties. News crews from Billings and even Denver had set up cameras along the county road, their satellite trucks forming an impromptu media village. Thomas remained in his house, blinds drawn, refusing all requests for interviews that came via his newly active cell phone. Sheriff Patterson had called twice more, assuring him that everything was under control, but suggesting he might want to say a few words to calm the growing crowd of spectators. "I've got nothing to say," Thomas had insisted. "I don't understand any of this fuss." Around noon, a hesitant knock at his back door startled him. He opened it to find Maria Ramirez, Miguel's grandmother, standing there with a covered dish in her weathered hands. At 82, she still stood straight, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I came through the back pasture," she explained with a conspiratorial smile. "Too many people out front." Despite his mood, Thomas found himself returning her smile. "Come in, Maria." In his kitchen, she uncovered a dish of homemade enchiladas, while Thomas made coffee. The familiar domestic routine in the midst of the surreal situation outside provided an anchor of normalcy. "You're hiding," she observed, not unkindly. Thomas grunted. "Wouldn't you? All this?" He gestured vaguely toward the front of his property. "For nothing." Maria shook her head. "Not nothing, Thomas. Never nothing." They ate in companionable silence before Maria spoke again. "You know, after you brought Miguel to me that day, he changed. Before, he was angry about his father leaving, about being poor, about everything. After, he had this purpose." Thomas focused on his plate. "That wasn't my doing." "No, he told me what you said in the truck." "Everyone keeps mentioning that. I don't recall saying anything special." Maria's eyes crinkled. "Sometimes we plant seeds without knowing it. You told him that your land had been in drought for 3 years, but you still never let your cattle go thirsty. You said managing water wasn't just about survival, but about respect for all living things." Thomas vaguely remembered the conversation. Idle talk to fill the silence with a child he'd barely known. Miguel took that to heart, Maria continued. Started reading about water conservation. Worked after school with the irrigation engineer at the Henderson farm. Won a science fair with a water filtration system. Her voice filled with pride. Now his company has brought water to communities that had none, all from seeds you planted. Thomas shook his head, uncomfortable with the weight of influence being placed on his shoulders. He'd have found his way without me. Perhaps, but this is the way it happened. Maria stood, gathering their empty plates. Those people at your gate, they're not there because you gave a boy water once. They're there because that moment represents something they're hungry for. And what's that? The belief that small kindnesses matter. That one person can make a difference. She touched his weathered hand. In these divided times, that's no small thing, Thomas. After Maria left, Thomas found himself drawn to the front window. Through a gap in the curtains, he studied the scene at his gate. The riders sat motionless on their horses, a living monument stretching now for nearly half a mile along his fence line. Some had hung small signs from their saddles, names of towns, farms, ranches. Against his better judgment, Thomas retrieved his binoculars and focused on those signs. Riverview Orchards, water saved during 22 drought. Lincoln County School, clean water system donated 2023. Crow Reservation Medical Clinic, life-giving water 2024. Each sign represented a ripple effect from Miguel's work. And if Maria was to be believed, each could be traced back to that hot summer day and a simple canteen of water. As evening approached, Thomas was surprised to see the riders lighting lanterns rather than dispersing. They were keeping their vigil through the night. Sheriff Patterson called again, this time to report that local churches and restaurants were providing food and facilities for the gathering crowd, which had swelled to nearly 1,000 spectators. "It's like nothing I've ever seen, Thomas," the sheriff said, wonder in his voice. "Not a single incident to report. Everyone's just waiting." Respectfully. That night, Thomas stood on his dark porch and watched the line of lanterns stretching along his property, a constellation of lights against the Montana darkness. For the first time since Sarah died, he felt something crack open inside him, a fissure in the careful wall he'd built around his heart. He couldn't name the feeling that seeped through, warm and unfamiliar, but as he finally turned to go inside, he realized his cheeks were wet with tears he hadn't known he was shedding. The third day dawned with a golden light that spilled across the valley, illuminating a scene that took Thomas's breath away. From his bedroom window, he could see that the line of riders now stretched completely around his property, 400 horsemen and women forming a living boundary around the Clearwater Ranch. The county road was jammed with vehicles, and a makeshift campground had sprung up in Henderson's adjacent field. Thomas's phone rang. "Miguel at last." "I'm on my way," Miguel said without preamble. "I'll be there in an hour. I'm sorry about all this, Mr. Blackwood. It got bigger than I expected." "What exactly is it?" Thomas demanded. "What are you planning, Miguel?" There was a pause. "Something good. I promise. Will you meet me at your gate when I arrive?" Despite his reservations, Thomas agreed. After hanging up, he showered and dressed with unusual care, selecting his best jeans and the Western shirt Sarah had given him for their last anniversary together. He even polished his boots, a gesture toward propriety his wife would have appreciated. Scout followed him to the truck, her tail wagging with excitement at the break in routine. Thomas hesitated, then whistled for her to jump in. Whatever was coming, he'd face it with his oldest friend beside him. As Thomas drove down his long driveway, the riders turned in unison to watch his approach. The silence was unnerving, no cheers, no calls, just the collective attention of 400 people and their mounts. News cameras swiveled to track his progress, and Thomas fought the urge to turn back. He parked near the gate and stepped out, Scout jumping down beside him. The morning air felt charged with expectation. A murmur ran through the crowd as a black SUV approached on a county road. It stopped, and Miguel emerged, dressed simply in jeans and a button-down shirt. Behind him came 3 more vehicles, from which emerged a group of people in business attire, carrying briefcases and folders. Miguel approached Thomas and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming down." Thomas shook it firmly. "Didn't have much choice with this army at my gate." Miguel smiled apologetically. "They came of their own accord. Each one represents a family or community touched by our water projects." "So I've been told. But why here? Why now?" "Because 15 years ago yesterday, you gave water to a thirsty boy without a second thought. And that changed everything." Miguel turned to address the gathered riders. "Isn't that right?" As if choreographed, each rider raised a canteen or water bottle in silent salute. The gesture sent an unexpected surge of emotion through Thomas. He swallowed hard, fighting for composure. Miguel continued, "These riders have come to say thank you, not just to me, but to you, the source of the river, so to speak." He gestured to the people who had arrived with him. "And these folks are here for something else. They're from the Clearwater Basin Trust." Thomas frowned. "Never heard of it." "Because until today, it didn't exist." Miguel nodded to a woman in a charcoal suit, who stepped forward with an official-looking document. "This is Dr. Eleanor Chun, water rights attorney and environmental advocate." Dr. Chun smiled. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm here to present you with the founding charter of the Clearwater Basin Trust. If you agree, your act of kindness will be institutionalized into something that will benefit this region for generations." Thomas took the document warily. "I don't understand." Miguel explained. My company has established a $100 million endowment for water conservation projects throughout Montana, starting here in Clearwater County. The trust will fund everything from irrigation improvements to watershed protection to clean water access for underserved communities. Thomas stared at him in disbelief. $100 million? Because of a canteen of water? No, Miguel said softly. Because that canteen of water taught me that resources aren't just commodities, they're responsibilities. Every drop matters. Every gesture counts. He turned to the assembled crowd. These riders have each pledged to volunteer with the trust. 400 people committed to continuing what you started. Thomas looked out at the sea of faces, weathered ranchers, young families, tribal elders from the reservation, farmers whose lands he'd passed for decades without knowing their names, all watching him with expectation. "What do you need from me?" Thomas asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Your blessing," Miguel said simply. "And maybe your wisdom, if you're willing to serve as honorary chairman of the trust. The land would remain yours, but we'd establish the headquarters in town." Thomas looked down at Scout, who gazed back with complete trust. He thought of Sarah, who had always believed in the goodness of people, of his estranged son James, who might someday hear of this day and understand something about his father that words had failed to convey. He looked up at the riders, still holding their water containers aloft in that silent salute. "Well," Thomas said finally, his voice breaking slightly, "I suppose we can't let all these folks sit on horseback forever." He extended his hand to Miguel. "You have my blessing." A cheer erupted from the crowd, the silence finally broken by a wave of joy that washed over the Clearwater Ranch like the rain they had all been waiting for.